Vice President Harris had sought to focus on root causes of migration to U.S.
Kamala Harris will speak to officials and nonprofit leaders in Guatemala and Mexico.
Scuffles between protesters and police at protest Tunisia. Newark film industry expands fourth trip despite pandemic.
Has plenty of work and is expanding.
Hello viewers, welcome back to TV Education Timor. Today is 12th of June 2021. I'm Durseli Lifania, happy gathering with us in the Voice of American News. I'll accompany all of you in a few minutes with many kind of information which will provide you to the real news in which is taken factually and actually in Internasional. We announce the VOA News through the TV Education Timor channel which cooperate with the Voice of America. Well, let's begin the news for today. United States Vice President Kamala Harris will be in Guatemala and Mexico this week on a trip that spotlights migration issues at the southern United States border. Michelle Quinn reports for VOA.
On her first foreign trip as Vice President, Kamala Harris will speak to officials and nonprofit leaders in Guatemala and Mexico about deep-seated problems such as poverty and violence, which migrant rights advocates say are the main reasons Central Americans and others leave their homes for the United States. The trip comes after the Biden administration formally ended a policy requiring asylum seekers to wait in Mexico, a policy established by then-President Donald Trump in 2019. The policy saw the return of nearly 70,000 people to Mexico in the 2 years it was in effect. Public attention on the U.S. southern border has waned in recent weeks as the number of unaccompanied minors held by the Border Patrol fell from about 5,700 children in the last week of March to 677 in early May. Still, people keep trying to cross. U.S. Customs and Border Protection reported that in April, it encountered about 180,000 people, a 3% increase over March 2021. In an NPR Ipsos poll in May, 4 out of 5 Americans identified the border issue as a problem. Some policymakers say that along with border enforcement, it is important to look at the conditions that push people in the Northern Triangle countries of El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras to travel north.
We are addressing the root causes of migration from the Northern Triangle countries, addressing the reasons why families send their children in the first place.
Republicans have criticized the Biden administration for its border policies, particularly the unwinding of some Trump-era efforts. Congressman Steve Scalise spoke in April.
Vice President Harris needs to go down to the border and see this for herself, because maybe she would then encourage President Biden to reverse his policies that have failed.
Harris is meeting Guatemala officials and nonprofit leaders on Monday. On Tuesday, she heads to Mexico City to meet with government officials. Michelle Quinn, VOA News.
Children shot, bombed, and knifed in Tigray war. Since the brutal civil war in Ethiopia, Tigray region began in November. Many healthcare centers in the area have been looted and destroyed.
Some of the children in this hospital ward traveled for weeks to get here after being shot, knifed, or hit by shrapnel in the ongoing war in Ethiopia's Tigray region. 15-year-old Bariha Gebre has lost one eye and is permanently blind in the other.
She and her cousin went out to play in the yard. Suddenly, they saw people running. They also ran and they were both shot.
It took Gebre weeks to get to this hospital in the regional capital, Makala, as they traveled from town to town, trying to find a clinic to treat her. He says everywhere he went, he found health centers destroyed and looted. After the fighting stopped, the nurse for this clinic in Edega Hamas returned to find a burnt-out tank, bullet-riddled signs, and dead soldiers on the streets. Like so many others, her clinic was empty.
Just I came and the door is opened The glass are broken and the equipments are stolen. Nothing here.
Patients, including children and victims of rape, still come to her with war injuries, but there is very little she can do.
Emergency medicines were there. It was stolen, and some is here. Infusions and dressing, suturing, all the equipments are stolen here.
Tefatowicz says she refers patients to the few hospitals in the main cities where medical workers say they are short of supplies in every department. In the Eider Hospital in Mekelle, some children say losing their limbs has been less painful than losing their loved ones.
My older brother was with me. He was injured and died.
The Ethiopian government says it takes very seriously its responsibility to alleviate the suffering of the people in the Tigray region. The government blames the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front for the war that began last November after a coordinated attack on its forces in the region. But many people in Tigray say the region is under attack from federal forces, Eritrean forces, and Amhara militias. Heather Murdoch, VOA News, Mekelle and Hamas, Ethiopia.
American political figures have changed a lot since the date of the Founding Fathers. British musicians wonder what they would look like if they were around today.
What would America's first president, George Washington, look like today if he were a modern politician? A 23-year-old British musician, George Hardy, used Photoshop to imagine our modern-day founding father. He then posted the result on Reddit and hit the jackpot. His newly created image went viral in no time. It was reposted tens of thousands of times on almost every social network imaginable. Many took time to ponder how George Washington would have carried himself these days. One criticism centered around Washington's suit.
Every other instance of his adult life, he's in fairly sumptuous materials. He liked a nice line, his clothes fit well, and he had presence in them. And I just don't see that in the modern rendering. The other thing that threw me off was a sort of gentleness in his demeanor, in his eyes. And Washington commanded respect without saying a word. And I don't get that feeling from this photo.
Another mistake George Hardy made, according to Coe, is Washington's hair. On Hardy's image, it is short and fine, while in reality, America's first president had amazing hair. People even thought it was a powdered wig, which was not true. One of Washington's slaves was his personal hairdresser and took care of his hair. Coe also says Washington's facial expression isn't quite accurate.
In this modern rendering, what the creator did capture is a thin, straight line of a smile. I don't think it quite has the heft that we would expect, but George Washington's mouth looks like that in almost every portrait, with slight differences because it depended on the pair of dentures that he was wearing. By the time he was inaugurated president, he only had one tooth left.
George Hardy wasn't the only one who tried to create a modern interpretation of George Washington's portrait. Comic book writer Magdalene Visaggio created her own version.
I actually used a base image of Joe Biden, and then took this a painting of Washington, a younger painting of Washington, and used FaceApp.
But Visaggio didn't stop there and created a whole series of portraits of American presidents and historical figures, including Julius Caesar, Nero, Shakespeare, and many others.
I did the first 18 presidents, so that's Washington through Grant. After Grant, photography starts to hit a certain level of quality.
And the trend seems to be contagious. Graphic designer Becca Saladin created a whole account on Instagram called Royalty Now, where she posts modern-day versions of the portraits of famous people of the past, each accompanied with a short story about them. Maxim Moskalkov for VOA News, Washington.
United States infrastructure proposal target again waterway system. Both President Joe Biden 1.7 trillion infrastructure plan and Republican contest proposal would invest in the country's island waterway and port.
Like clockwork, towboats slowly push barges on the Illinois River, carrying everything from salt and petroleum to the top commodities produced in the state, corn and soybeans.
This is the backbone of our economy. We feed the world from right here.
Tom Heinold oversees the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers facilities along the Illinois River, including the Starved Rock Lock and Dam near Utica. Part of a system throughout the state, the National Waterways Foundation says moves over 83 million tons of freight annually, worth over $13 billion. Using barges to transport goods on the rivers is efficient and environmentally friendly, reducing the need to use petroleum-guzzling trucks.
We can take 1,000 tractor-trailer trucks worth of commodities and put them on a single 15-barge tow.
But the locks, which rise and fall to allow barges to navigate at a consistent depth of the river, were built nearly a century ago and are showing their age.
It is literally in places crumbling. You can see the concrete right in front of you deteriorating. On the vertical walls you can see the corner armor rusting, some of it's bent. It needs some help.
They were built with a 50-year design life.
Rodney Weinzierl is a farmer in central Illinois, where the waterways are key to getting crops to foreign buyers. He also serves as the executive director of the Illinois Corn Growers Association, which advocates for improving the country's inland waterway system.
Exports are very important to Illinois and the U.S., and infrastructure is what keeps us competitive with foreign competition.
But Weinzierl says since most taxpayers rarely engage with this part of the country's infrastructure, the waterways often get overlooked.
So the public just never really sees it. So it's much lower on the list of awareness of infrastructure that's really helped make our nation what it is today.
It needs some help to be reliable and safe.
001. Previous funding allowed Heinold to oversee some upgrades to the Starved Rock Lock and Dam in 2020, which closed the river to all traffic for several months. But Heinold says more work is needed up and down the system, and Weinzierl understands it isn't cheap.
Each one of these projects are several $100 million.
Which is why he hopes enough money is allocated to perform upgrades to 2 locks along the Illinois River in the greatest need of repair.
These are long-term investments.
Heinold says he already has a list of what he would do with an infusion of funding.
It's not that we have it spent before it gets here, but we know exactly what our capabilities are and where the funding needs to go.
President Biden's infrastructure plan would dedicate $17 billion to improve waterways, ports, and airports. A Senate Republican counteroffer also proposes spending billions to upgrade waterways. Efforts to advance legislation both parties can support continues in Washington. Kane Fairbaugh, VOA News, Utica, Illinois.
Newark film industry expand footprint despite pandemic. As Newark COVID restriction is, Broadway is hoping to draw people back to the big apply.
The coronavirus pandemic has caused a surge in demand for TV shows and streaming platform projects that can be enjoyed at home. And while the entertainment industry took a big hit from the pandemic lockdown, one New York studio has plenty of work and is expanding. Kaufman Astoria, one of the largest studios on the U.S. East Coast, has just added a new pavilion to the list of its existing ones. It's not Hollywood, but it's definitely growing.
We've been busy here at Kaufman, back since the early 80s. But what we've seen is as the streaming services came into play and more channels, we'll call it, wanted to have original programming, the need for original content production boomed, just like off the charts boom.
Located in Queens, Kaufman Astoria Studios has a long history. Founded in 1920, it is one of the oldest studios in the U.S. Paramount Pictures Studios used to be housed here until it relocated to California.
This was home to silent films, then as talkies came in, it was the Marx Brothers and W.C. Fields and Rudolph Valentino and Gloria Swanson. So it was the heyday, those glory days of of Hollywood is what was done here at Kaufman Astoria.
The movie industry moved to Los Angeles in the 1930s because it was cheaper to work out west and weather permitted year-round filming. But New York is still home to lots of TV and film production.
People think, well, of course, Hollywood had become Hollywood by then and there was no filmmaking in New York, but that simply wasn't true. There's always been a steady heartbeat of filmmaking here in New York, even though a lot had shifted to LA and there were sort of peaks and valleys in New York. I mean, now, of course, nowadays, it's absolutely thriving. There's so much production here.
Kaufman Astoria Studios is where Sesame Street was originally filmed, as well as TV shows New Amsterdam and Nurse Jackie, and movies like Carlito's Way and Men in Black. And while vaccinations are beginning to allow people to get back out into the world, they are also still looking for the next binge-worthy show. And these expanding New York studios are working hard to keep up with the ever-growing demand. For Evgeny Maslov in New York, Anna Rice, VOA News.
4 cooling towers were demolished at the former power station in the British city of Staffordshire on Sunday, June 6, 2021. Scuffles between protesters and police at protest Tunisia. Well, viewers, that's all the news for today. And don't forget to keep following the COVID rules by how to protect yourself from the virus. By wearing a mask, keep washing your hands, and keep social distancing. For more information, please call us on number below. I'm dear Lifania and all crew of VOA and TV Education Timor. We would like to say thank you so much for watching. Have a great day and see you all next time. TV Education Timor is the future inspiration.